Alabama beat Vanderbilt. No, that's not the headline. Vanderbilt beats Alabama yesterday in Nashville, and the entire world imploded in on itself. Vandy was 0-60 versus the top 5 entering yesterday. And now they got a 1 in the W column. This was a 4.5 Chalai game on the 1 to 5 Chalai rating system. Congratulations to Diego Pavia, who now secures ownership of the entire state of Alabama. This dude casually marched into Auburn last year and beat the Tigers with New Mexico State. And now he beats Alabama as like a combined 100-point underdog. I don't know how else you go about owning a state, but follow that blueprint. Just go beat Bama and Auburn, and that'll do it. I watched this in stunned disbelief. I got to tell you, even the person who sat here emphatically and told you, Volcanic Saturday's coming, everyone, even I didn't quite sound the alarm thinking about this game. Although we did keep it vague enough to where I could reasonably take credit for it. No, I didn't see this coming. And I'll tell you, there's a lot to be taken away from this on both sides of the equation. So this is not the end-all, be-all or anything like that, but there are several lessons we're starting to learn, and Bama's no difference. Several lessons we're starting to learn this deep into the season. But I don't know how you felt about this. I had a whole bunch of people of the opinion that, oh, it's Vandy, man, it's just Vandy. Well, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to talk about what Alabama is in a second. But I don't know what kind of number SEC networked in on this game. But I would imagine towards the end, it had to be one of their highest watched quarter hours in quite some time. I watched it. You watched it. Everyone watched it. And you know who else watched it. We waste no time. We bring her in. Saturday's Sarah McLachlan special happened right here in Nashville, Tennessee, courtesy of the Vanderbilt Commodores. Alabama fans headed up I-65, expecting basically a social event to break out. And instead, they got a football game, and they got the Sarah McLachlan special dropped on front of their head. Vanderbilt held the ball 42 minutes in this game. Vanderbilt held the ball 42 minutes on Bama. I mean, they've got a majority of the stadium crimson. It's going to be a nice Saturday in Nashville. We'll get home by dark, and you towed an L home. 7 of 9 drives, 4+ minutes for Vandy, 12 of 18 on third down. They outrushed Alabama, friends. They outgained Alabama. They outcoached Alabama. They outplayed Alabama. They stormed the field on Bama. They took the goalpost out for good measure. They had 9 more first downs. And after all the dust had settled and Kalen DeBoer had his press conference, there you see it, Broadway and the Cumberland River in the distance and the goalpost, while I'm sitting 700 miles away on a tarmac in Houston, is being marched 1 block away from the studio I sit in right now. I flew 700 miles, 1,400 round trip to see a splattering, and I could have walked to this game and seen the outcome of the afternoon, perhaps the outcome of the year, the Sarah McLachlan special. Vanderbilt stuns Alabama 40-35. And I don't know how much you know about Nashville geography, but you may think back a couple of years ago, ironically, when Tennessee beat Alabama, and you remember they tore the goalpost down there. We were at that game. Got a little smoke inhalation on the field, even though it was outdoors. That's how thick the cigar smoke was. And they took that goalpost out of Neyland, and they dumped it into the river there as well. And this may sound the same. It's not the same. The Cumberland River is nowhere close to Vanderbilt Stadium. In fact, I live in downtown. I live downtown Nashville. I go over there frequently. I do some radio stuff over there. I know people who live over there. It would never even occur to me to walk that distance. It's not safe. It's not practical. It's not feasible. These people took that goalpost the better part of 2 miles in heavy Saturday night Broadway traffic and chunked that thing in the river. It's not a movie script. They'd probably reject it. On the surface, because Vandy beat Alabama. And then secondly, because they'd say, you can't carry that thing that far. Well, maybe not your grandfather's Vanderbilt, but this is Clark Lee's Vanderbilt. I thought the broadcast yesterday did a great job of explaining what Vanderbilt is and who Vanderbilt is. Most people have no idea. We don't talk a lot about Vanderbilt on this show because when I do, no one pays attention, no one listens, the numbers are terrible. And I think nationally, not a lot of people know anything about Vanderbilt. And I think the ignorance in what Vanderbilt is was shown yesterday in people's reaction. People reacted and they said, Vanderbilt, like, you can't have this happen against Vanderbilt. Well, true enough, Alabama can never lose to Vanderbilt, except what Vanderbilt was and what Vanderbilt is, two very different things. You can acknowledge this without making excuses. I'm about to address Alabama in a second, but we addressed the winners on the show first, and Vanderbilt's the winner here. I thought the broadcast did a really good job of explaining what Clark Lee has tried to tell folks around Nashville over the past year and a half, and that is they realized they had to scrap it. They had to scrap who they were trying to be. They were pouring all of this time and energy and investment into developing not just football players, but men. They were trying to develop the same way that you would claim to try and do it at other places. But what was happening is they were pouring hours and hours and millions of dollars of resource and manpower into developing guys, and then they just leave. If they get any good, they get poached in the portal and they leave. And they realized this is not utopia. We'd love to do it that way, but this is the real world. This is Vanderbilt. We can't afford to do it that way. We are the bottom rung in the ladder of this conference when it comes to desirability to play at. So we got to do it differently. So what they did is they started doing it differently, and they started going and putting a roster together differently. I was listening to Barton, who went on our friends will cover 3 last night. Barton was once a part of that pod and is the GM over at Vandy now. And I'll talk to him from time to time. Talked to him a couple of months ago. First words out of his mouth were, "Yeah, we got a different kind of team this year." It wasn't some guarantee or anything like that, but it was the makeup of the team's different because we have to put it together differently. Well, what they ended up with is they ended up with a lot of pit bulls on their team, and you got the rest of America thinking it's calculators and bow ties over there, and it's not. And all of a sudden, they're in a game against Alabama, and here's what was the wildest part of this game. Okay, Vandy got an early lead. Like, that's happened before. We've seen crazy stuff happen. They played Georgia last week. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Bama could come in flat, and they did. And Vandy marches down the field and scores on them. And then defensive score, and they're up 13-0. But the crazy part was not that. That's happened before. That'll happen again. The crazy part is early third quarter, it's 23-21. Bama has settled things down. They've righted the ship, and now it's a 2-point game. Still got almost a full half of football to play. I'm thinking, as I'm driving back to Houston, I'm listening to / kind of watching the game. I'm thinking, boy, I hope that we remember what the first half of this game was like. I hope Vandy gets credit for what they were able to accomplish. Sort of the way you sounded when USF played Bama really tough. But it ended up looking like a blowout. I mean, I'm thinking Bama's about to hang 50. Vandy won't come close to that, and they may even end up covering here. The rest of the game was the story. Vandy outplayed them the rest of the way. Like, Vandy outplayed them early, Bama catches up, Vandy outplays them the rest of the way. Outside of that opening third quarter touchdown drive for Alabama, they outscored them in the second half too. That's the story. Like, that's the difference if you really want to boil it down. You can talk all you want to about how undisciplined Bama was defensively, and they were. You can talk all you want to about how unprepared they looked, and they were. And how flat and lethargic, whatever other adjectives you want to throw around, all due criticism to Alabama. I'm about to heap a metric ton of it on them. Vanderbilt's a pretty good football team. And if you want to do the whole it's just Vanderbilt thing, it's kind of not. Because just Vanderbilt doesn't beat Vatech in week 1. They don't take Missouri to overtime. Vanderbilt goes and shows what the low end of their capability is when they lose to Georgia State, because Vanderbilt is still a roster that's not chock full of future Sunday players. So their C- game is going to get them beat by a lot of inferior teams. But their best this year is capable of way more than Vandy's best used to be capable of. And we got a huge live audience, by the way. Welcome in. We do this thing free. We do the show like 3 nights a week free, and we just simply ask that you subscribe to the channel. That's all that we ask, and we appreciate it when you do. It takes a collective effort to look this bad. I had, I don't know, dozens, maybe hundreds of calls / texts from my Alabama people or people talking about Alabama about this game. And the first thing that bothers me a little bit about college football is when you lose a game, people only want to make it about what went wrong, as if the other guy's not allowed to try. Like Vanderbilt is not allowed to really try to win the game. Having said that, Bama's got to beat Vanderbilt 10 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100. This result's never supposed to be able to happen. So I got a lot of calls / texts like, who do you think this falls on? Do you think it's players? Was it coaches? Well, it's everything. It's everything. It's a collective failure to execute on all fronts. So there is not a person in that organization that doesn't shoulder at least some blame, but it ultimately funnels up to the top. I think Kalen DeBoer is one of the best in the game, but he had his team unprepared to play this thing. However that ended up happening, they were unprepared to go up there and play or come up here and play. And they'll never admit that. I don't think they'll ever admit it. But you got to understand, there has never been more talk about this sport than there is now. There's never been more access to information, shows like this, than there have been at any point in history. So as long as you've got an organization of humans, you cannot totally immunize yourself. You cannot totally wall off your organization from outside noise. It's impossible for you not to realize we just beat Georgia and now we're going to go play Vandy. You know what your mind shifts to. Your mind shifts to what can we get accomplished this week? Who can we give time to heal up this week? I guarantee you that happened there as well. And it's a bitter, bitter pill to swallow. Saw some folks talking about Saban's loss to Louisiana Monroe in year one. This is worse than that. It's worse than that because it's a ready-made roster. Saban didn't inherit one. DeBoer did. That's a ready-made roster. That's a turnkey winner. For all I know, this team could still go on to win a national title. This team is probably still a playoff team. But it didn't really matter yesterday. So I think what we saw, I think what we're seeing with Alabama, year one under Kalen DeBoer, is if you go bowling, a lot of us have been bowling. Bumper bowling is really fun and really safe. It's really fun because you can turn the ball loose as erratically as you want to. It can't go in the gutter. And the reason it can't is because the bumpers are pulled out. Used to love it. I mean, I was still 15 years old trying to play bumper bowling. Well, then they told me eventually that's for little kids and we had to get rid of the bumpers, and I didn't go bowling a whole lot after that. But bumper bowling is really fun because it's all reward and very little risk. That was Alabama football under Nick Saban. You guys knew there was a certain degree to the left or right that things could go, but it would never go in the gutter, that you would never have this game happen. But it happened yesterday. So what do we make of that? Do we make of that the program is imploding? Do we make of that Kalen DeBoer can't tote Nick Saban's jock? I don't think I make anything like that of it at all. What I think we're seeing is the trial run. It's not a trial run because it counts, but it's the first run through this whole experience that is the SEC for Kalen DeBoer. They had a totally unacceptable result happen yesterday. So now what? What's the reaction? If the reaction is they beat South Carolina 38-10, then everything looks okay. But the more results you get, the more information you get, the further crystallized your opinion can become. So think along with me. What have we seen from Bama so far this year? Well, we saw them play this really weird game against South Florida, right? And it's 42-16, but it really wasn't that because up until the final 6 minutes of the game, it was a dogfight. So we looked at that game and we said, what do I make of this? Let's let the future be the guide. That's what we said on the show. And then they went to Wisconsin and dominated the next week. But they dominated, just tuck it in the back of your mind, after knocking out Wisconsin's starting quarterback early on. Still counts, it's a win, but you just tuck that away. Okay, so then they play Georgia, and they're up 30-7 at the half, and they look like the best team in the country. And you have what happened in the second half go down, and Ryan Williams makes the play he did. And Ryan Williams either made a play that saved a game, or based on the way you want to look at it, he may have created a blatant disregard for what should be major concerns defensively. I was totally happy, acknowledging the win for what it was. Let's see what Bama does moving forward. I never had the Vanderbilt game in my mind. I had at Tennessee in a few weeks in my mind. I can afford to overlook teams coaches and players cannot. And whether they overlook Vandy or not, they go to Vandy and get 40 hung on them. I think 14 or 13 of those were defensive scores, but nevertheless, they count just as much as the offensive points do. And so now we have an entirely disastrous 4 quarters of football against Vandy. We have 2 quarters of pretty disastrous defensive football against Georgia. And so it starts to stack up, and you look at the last 6 quarters from this team, and maybe you thought something previous or prior to yesterday, and now maybe you think something different. That's normal. That's called adjusting your expectations and your perception with the added and new information. But that defense is what it is. Like, that defense is young. That defense, I think, dealt with a lot of what USF sort of exposed and Vandy saw and used the bye week to get ready and then exposed them again with, probably more effectively, even than USF did. Do they face a whole lot of offenses that will probably commit to doing that down the road? I don't think so. So maybe it's something you look back on in time, come December and say, I'm glad we didn't have to deal with a whole lot of that anymore. I mean, Georgia Southern ran expletive all over Alabama once upon a time at the height of the Saban dynasty. It's still one of the legendary sound bites from him. No one really did it the rest of the year, but it still happened. Now, it wasn't a win, but it still happened. There are pretty significant concerns here for Alabama. So what it proved yesterday is the bumpers are gone. It is possible to go to an extreme that never would have been possible under Nick Saban. There are many different reasons for that. You can speculate on it all you want to. I've got my own theories, but I've also got a lot of show to do tonight. The bumpers are off right now. Now, as much as yesterday impacted your idea and my idea of what Alabama could be for the rest of the way, they've still got the second best odds to win the SEC. Still got better odds in Georgia, Tennessee, et cetera. Texas is the favorite to win the SEC now. That did change according to FanDuel yesterday, understandably so. I'm looking at this result, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, this is going to impact the future, but not just the rest of October and November. A lot about what will be Alabama in 2025, 6, and 7 will get decided over the coming few weeks, and that is in the form of what is and isn't tolerated around there, and that is in the form of what is and isn't expected, what is and isn't the standard around there. There are folks that are associated with that program right now. There are folks on that staff right now that won't be there next year. That's normal. That's churn that you would deal with in any level of college football. So the personnel, the pieces may come and go. One that won't come and go is Kalen DeBoer. He'll be there. And the other thing is the standard of expectation. And not just what you expect, not just your goals, but like what you have to do and how you have to carry yourself in order to consistently obtain those week over week, year over year. A lot of that is still in the oven right now. And if you're any good at what you do, you probably do some of your best growing during times like these. So again, I am happy to look at this result and say, wow, that's disastrous for Bama. Wow, hat tip to Vanderbilt. Legendary afternoon/evening in Nashville. But as it relates to the future, one of these teams is baked into the national title conversation every year. It's Alabama. So we're going to find out a lot about what the makeup of the program under Kalen DeBoer will be instead of just the team over the coming weeks. Can't wait to see what they have.